In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 alien civilizations bow before the might of the Zephyrian Empire, one simple act of arrogance would shake the very foundations of cosmic power. When Princess Empress Lyralii dismissed a human diplomat's marriage proposal with nothing more than a contemptuous laugh, she believed she was rejecting a primitive species barely worthy of acknowledgement. But what she didn't know was that humanity had been watching, waiting, and preparing. What she couldn't have imagined was that her rejection would become the catalyst that would force the entire galaxy to witness just how terrifyingly wrong they had been about the human race. Sometimes the greatest empires fall not to armies or fleets, but to the wounded pride of a species that refuses to kneel. And, sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you never bothered to truly understand. The galaxy was about to learn why you should never underestimate a human with nothing left to lose. Ambassador Marcus Chen stood in the gleaming corridors of the imperial palace of Zephyros Prime, his polished diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the flowing robes and exotic attire of the countless alien dignitaries surrounding him. The crystalline walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to mock his human eyes with their impossible geometry. He had spent 3 years learning the intricate protocols of Zephyrian court life, mastering their complex language of gesture and tone, all for this moment. The marriage proposal tucked within his formal diplomatic pouch represented more than just an alliance between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. It was humanity's desperate attempt to secure their place among the galactic powers before it was too late. The proposal had been crafted by Earth's finest diplomats, economists, and military strategists. It offered technological exchanges, trade agreements, and military cooperation that would benefit both species for generations. But, more than that, it offered something the Zephyrian Empire had never received from humanity before: recognition of their absolute supremacy in the galaxy. The proposal acknowledged Princess Empress Lyralii as the sovereign ruler of not just the Zephyrian Empire, but as the rightful overlord of all inhabited systems within the known galaxy. For humanity, it was a bitter pill to swallow, but survival demanded sacrifice. Marcus had chosen to deliver the proposal himself rather than sending it through normal diplomatic channels. He understood the weight of what he carried. Earth's population had reached 15 billion, but their resources were depleting rapidly. Climate disasters had made vast regions uninhabitable, and, despite their technological advances, they needed the stability that only galactic citizenship could provide. The Zephyrians, with their purple-hued skin and elongated limbs, moved through the palace with a grace that seemed to defy physics. Their society had dominated the galaxy for over 3,000 years, crushing rebellions and absorbing civilizations with ruthless efficiency. They possessed technology that could reshape planets, fleets that numbered in the millions, and psychic abilities that allowed them to manipulate matter at the molecular level. As Marcus approached the throne room, he noticed the subtle changes in the behavior of the alien courtiers around him. The Valkyrian trade ministers, with their 6 arms and compound eyes, stepped aside with barely concealed disgust. The Thoraxian military advisors, towering insectoid beings whose chitinous armor gleamed under the palace lights, clicked their mandibles in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of derisive laughter. To these beings, humans were newcomers who had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. While other species had been exploring the galaxy for millennia, humanity had only made contact with alien life 50 years ago. In galactic terms, they were infants playing among giants. The massive doors to the throne room slid open with a sound like singing crystal. The chamber beyond defied every law of architecture Marcus thought he understood. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, covered in what appeared to be living constellations that moved and danced in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Streams of liquid light flowed along the walls, converging at a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive gemstone. Princess Empress Lyralii sat upon this throne with the casual arrogance of someone who had never known anything but absolute power. She was tall even by Zephyrian standards, her purple skin marked with silver tattoos that indicated her royal bloodline. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like cut gems, fixed on Marcus with the kind of attention one might give to a mildly interesting insect. Surrounding her throne were her advisors and court officials. Minister Vex Thaler, her chief military strategist, stood to her right. His scarred face and missing left arm testified to his experience in the rebellion wars that had crushed the last major uprising against Zephyrian rule. To her left stood advisor Zilnara, whose responsibility included managing the tribute systems that kept hundreds of worlds in line. Marcus followed the protocols perfectly as he approached. 3 steps forward, pause, bow at precisely 30 degrees, wait for acknowledgement. The rituals that had taken him months to learn felt natural now, muscle memory born from countless hours of practice. The Princess Empress gestured for him to approach with a movement so slight that Marcus almost missed it. When he reached the designated position 15 feet from her throne, he knelt and placed his diplomatic pouch on the floor before him. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly in the vast chamber despite speaking barely above normal volume. The acoustics of the room had been designed to amplify even whispers to ensure no word could be hidden from the ruler. "I come before you as the representative of the United Earth Government, bearing a proposal of the utmost importance." Lyraliai's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated interest in Zephyrian facial expressions. Around the throne room, various alien officials moved closer, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "The people of Earth recognize the absolute sovereignty of your Imperial Majesty over all civilized worlds in the galaxy," Marcus continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth but necessary for what was to come. "In recognition of this truth, and in hopes of securing a beneficial relationship between our peoples, the United Earth Government formally requests consideration of a marriage alliance between your Imperial Majesty and a representative of humanity." The silence that followed stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he waited for a response. He had expected surprise, perhaps skepticism, maybe even anger. He had not expected what came next. Lyraliai began to laugh. It started as a soft chuckle, barely audible, but it grew quickly into something that filled the vast throne room with its mocking tone. It was not the laugh of someone who found something amusing. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard the most absurd thing imaginable. Her laughter was taken up by her courtiers, a chorus of alien voices joining in what Marcus suddenly realized was not just amusement, but genuine contempt. The sound echoed off the crystalline walls, seeming to come from every direction at once. "Marriage?" Lyraliai finally managed to speak through her laughter, her voice carrying a musical quality that would have been beautiful in any other context. "The primitive humans wish to propose marriage to me?" She stood from her throne, her movements fluid and predatory as she descended the steps toward Marcus. He remained kneeling, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to stand and defend his dignity. "Tell me, little human," she said, now standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could see his reflection distorted in her gem-like eyes. "What possible benefit could I derive from joining myself to your kind? You have nothing I need. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your military could not defeat a single one of my patrol fleets. Your entire civilization is younger than some of my personal jewelry." Marcus forced himself to remain calm, even as humiliation burned in his chest. "Your Majesty, the proposal outlines significant technological exchanges, trade agreements, and technological exchanges?" Lyraliai interrupted, her voice rising with incredulous amusement. "What technology could you possibly possess that would interest the Zephyrian Empire? Your fastest ships move like crawling insects compared to our vessels. Your weapons could not scratch the hull of our smallest fighters. Your medicine is so primitive that you still die from diseases we cured millennia ago." She began walking in a circle around his kneeling form, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining something obvious to a particularly slow student. "Let me help you understand something about the galaxy, little human. There are 3 types of species in known space: those who rule, those who serve, and those who die. Your species exists only because we have not yet decided which of the latter 2 categories you belong in." The courtiers laughed again at this proclamation, and Marcus felt his jaw clench despite his diplomatic training. He had known this would be difficult, but the casual cruelty in her words went beyond anything he had prepared for. "Your Majesty," he tried again, his voice carefully controlled, "Earth offers resources, strategic positioning, and resources?" Lyraliai's laughter cut him off again. "We own 17 worlds richer than your entire planet. Strategic positioning? For what? You exist in a backwater system that serves no strategic purpose whatsoever. You have nothing, you are nothing, and you offer nothing that I could not simply take if I desired it." She stopped directly in front of him again, leaning down so that her face was level with his. But, please, continue with your proposal. I find myself curious about exactly how delusional your species has become. Marcus reached into his diplomatic pouch and withdrew a crystal and data storage device containing the full details of Earth's proposal. His hands remained steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. The complete terms are contained here, Your Majesty. Perhaps your advisors could review. Lyralii plucked the device from his hands and held it up to the light, examining it as if it were some curious artifact. How quaint. A primitive data storage device, probably containing primitive thoughts from primitive minds. Without warning, she crushed it between her fingers, the crystal exploding into glittering powder that drifted to the floor. There, she said, brushing the dust from her hands. I have considered your proposal and found it wanting. You may return to your little world and inform your leaders that the Zephyrian Empire has no interest in degrading itself through association with humanity. The dismissal was absolute, final, and delivered with such casual contempt that it took Marcus a moment to process what had happened. 3 years of preparation, Earth's last hope for peaceful integration into galactic society, destroyed in seconds and scattered across an alien throne room floor. He stood slowly, fighting to maintain his composure. Every eye in the vast chamber was upon him, watching to see how the rejected human would react to his humiliation. Some seemed curious, others amused, and a few appeared almost sympathetic to his plight. Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him, I thank you for your consideration. Lyralii had already turned away, returning to her throne as if he no longer existed. Advisor Zilnara, please ensure that our guest finds his way back to his ship safely. We would not want any unfortunate accidents to befall such an important diplomatic representative. The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable, and the laughter that followed from her courtiers made it clear that Marcus's humiliation was now a source of entertainment for the entire Zephyrian court. As he was escorted from the throne room by a pair of Zephyrian guards, Marcus could hear the conversation resuming behind him as if nothing of importance had occurred. To them, he realized, nothing had. The rejection of humanity's proposal was so insignificant that it barely registered as an interruption in their day. But, as Marcus walked through the gleaming corridors toward the docking bay where his ship waited, something crystallized in his mind. The casual contempt, the absolute certainty of superiority, the complete dismissal of humanity as irrelevant, all of it burned itself into his memory with perfect clarity. He thought of the billions of people on Earth who were counting on this mission. He thought of the children in the overcrowded refugee cities who needed resources that could only come through galactic trade. He thought of the scientists and engineers who had poured their lives into developing technologies that had just been dismissed as primitive toys. Most of all, he thought of the laughter. That contemptuous, dismissive laughter that said humanity was not just being rejected, but that they had been fools to even try. By the time Marcus reached his ship, his humiliation had transformed into something far more dangerous, a cold, calculating anger that would not be satisfied until the galaxy learned exactly how wrong they were about humanity. As his ship lifted off from Zephyros Prime and began its journey back to Earth, Marcus began composing his report. But, alongside his official diplomatic summary, he began writing something else, a detailed analysis of everything he had observed about Zephyrian technology, military positions, and governmental structure. The Princess Empress had made one critical error in her dismissal of humanity. She had assumed that because they were technologically inferior, they were also strategically naive. She had not considered that a species capable of developing faster than light travel in just 50 years might possess other qualities that were not immediately apparent. Marcus smiled grimly as he worked, remembering something his grandfather had told him about human history: the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the biggest sword, but the one who has nothing left to lose and refuses to give up. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. The emergency session of the United Earth Government convened exactly 18 hours after Ambassador Marcus Chen's ship docked at Luna Station. The Great Assembly Hall, carved into the lunar bedrock and reinforced with transparent aluminum viewports showing the blue marble of Earth beyond, had never seen such tension. Representatives from every major nation, colony, and orbital habitat had gathered to hear the results of humanity's last diplomatic gambit. President Elena Vesquez stood at the central podium, her weathered face grim as she addressed the assembled delegates. Behind her, a holographic display showed the current status of Earth's resources: diminishing, critical, unsustainable. The numbers painted a picture that everyone in the room already knew by heart. Fellow representatives, President Vasquez began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Ambassador Chen's mission to Zephyros Prime has concluded. The results were not what we hoped for. Marcus himself sat in the front row, still wearing his diplomatic uniform but looking like a man who had aged years in the span of days. The humiliation he had endured played across his features whenever he thought no one was looking, but when called upon to speak, his voice remained steady and professional. The Princess Empress dismissed our proposal without consideration, Marcus reported to the assembly. Not only was it rejected, but it was done so with such contempt that I believe our very existence is now seen as an insult to Zephyrian dignity. A murmur rippled through the assembly, a sound like wind through leaves that spoke of fear, anger, and desperation in equal measure. Director Sarah Kim of the Colonial Defense Force leaned forward in her seat, her cybernetic eye focusing on Marcus with mechanical precision. Ambassador, in your assessment, are we facing immediate military action from the Empire? She asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, Director. If anything, that might be preferable. They don't see us as enough of a threat to warrant military action. To them, we're simply irrelevant. Dr. James Liu, the head of Earth's Advanced Research Division, stood to address the assembly. His normally calm demeanor showed cracks of frustration as he spoke. Then, we proceed with the contingency plans. Project Prometheus has been in development for 12 years, waiting for exactly this scenario. Prometheus? Asked Representative Anderson from the African Federation. I thought that project was theoretical. Dr. Liu smiled grimly. Everything is theoretical until it becomes necessary. Project Prometheus is based on a simple premise: if we cannot compete with alien technology directly, we must develop our own advantages. Advantages that our alien neighbors cannot anticipate because they have never encountered them before. President Vasquez gestured for Dr. Liu to continue. Tell them about the preliminary results, Dr. Dr. Liu activated his personal holographic projector, filling the space above the assembly with complex diagrams and data streams. For the past 12 years, we have been analyzing every piece of alien technology we could acquire through trade, theft, or archaeological discovery. What we found was illuminating. The hologram shifted to show a comparison chart between human and various alien technologies. Every major galactic civilization has developed along similar technological paths. They discovered faster-than-light travel through manipulation of exotic matter. They developed energy weapons through plasma containment. They created artificial intelligence through quantum consciousness matrices. Representative Chun from the Asian Alliance frowned at the display. That sounds remarkably advanced compared to our capabilities. It is, Dr. Liu agreed. But here's what they all have in common: they think in the same patterns. Exotic matter manipulation, plasma physics, quantum consciousness, these are the technological pillars that every galactic civilization has built upon. They represent evolutionary convergence on a galactic scale. The hologram changed again, showing a new set of diagrams that looked alien even compared to the alien technology. Humans, however, developed in complete isolation. Our technological tree is utterly unique. We never developed exotic matter manipulation because we couldn't access exotic matter. Instead, we mastered classical physics to a degree that no other species has ever attempted. Marcus found himself leaning forward despite his exhaustion. What do you mean? Dr. Liu grinned, and, for the first time in days, it was a genuinely happy expression. I mean that while aliens were learning to bend reality with exotic matter, we were learning to make classical physics dance. Our fusion technology doesn't rely on exotic matter, it uses magnetic confinement fields that create pressures and temperatures that other species consider impossible to achieve with primitive classical physics. The implications began to dawn on the assembly as Dr. Liu continued. Our computer technology doesn't rely on quantum consciousness matrices. We developed artificial intelligence through neural networks and machine learning algorithms that process information in ways that alien minds simply cannot comprehend. To them, our AI appears to think in completely impossible patterns. Director Kim stood up, her cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the information. Are you saying that our technological inferiority might actually be a strategic advantage? I'm saying that our technological differences make us completely unpredictable to species that have grown accustomed to fighting enemies who think exactly like they do, Dr. Liu replied. But, more than that, I'm saying that we've discovered something in the past year that changes everything. The hologram shifted one final time, showing what appeared to be a standard human spacecraft. But, as the image rotated, details became visible that made several representatives gasp. This is the UES Defiance, our first Prometheus-class vessel. It uses no exotic matter, no plasma weapons, no quantum consciousness matrices. Instead, it uses technologies that we developed specifically because we couldn't access what the aliens consider standard materials. Representative Patel from the Indian Territory squinted at the hologram. It doesn't look particularly impressive. Dr. Liu's grin widened. That's the point. To alien sensors, it will appear to be made of primitive materials because it is made of primitive materials. Steel, titanium, ceramic composites, nothing that would trigger their advanced detection systems as a threat. But, what can it actually do? President Vasquez asked. Instead of answering directly, Dr. Liu gestured to Director Kim, who stood and activated her own holographic display. 3 months ago, we conducted field tests against simulated alien defenses based on all available intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities. The results were unexpected. The hologram showed a battle simulation that made the entire assembly sit up straighter. The primitive-looking human vessel moved with impossible speed and agility, its weapons tearing through alien defenses that should have been impenetrable. Our kinetic weapons use no energy signatures that alien sensors are designed to detect, Director Kim explained. They're looking for plasma discharges, exotic matter fluctuations, and quantum field distortions. They're not looking for tungsten rods accelerated to 30% of light speed using magnetic rail systems. Our propulsion system doesn't manipulate exotic matter, Dr. Liu added. It uses fusion ramjets combined with gravitational slingshot maneuvers calculated by AI systems that think in ways alien minds cannot predict. We can achieve velocities and acceleration patterns that appear to violate physics to species that don't understand our mathematical approaches. The silence in the assembly hall was profound as the implications sank in. Finally, Representative O'Brien from the European Union spoke. Are you telling us that we can actually fight the Zephyrian Empire? I'm telling you that we can fight them in ways they will never see coming, Director Kim replied. Our weapons are invisible to their sensors. Our tactics are based on mathematical principles they've never encountered. Our ships appear primitive but can outmaneuver anything in their fleet. Ambassador Marcus suddenly stood up, his diplomatic composure finally cracking to reveal the anger that had been burning inside him since his return from Zephyros Prime. And I'm telling you that we should do exactly that. President Vasquez raised an eyebrow. Ambassador, you're suggesting military action? Marcus turned to address the full assembly, his voice carrying the weight of personal humiliation transformed into righteous fury. I'm suggesting that the Zephyrian Empire has made a fundamental error in how they view humanity. They see us as primitive, weak, and irrelevant. They believe that their technological superiority makes them invulnerable. He gestured toward the holographic displays still floating above the assembly. But, they've never faced an enemy like us. They've never fought a species that developed independently, that thinks differently, that approaches warfare from completely unexpected angles. Dr. Liu nodded enthusiastically. Marcus is right. Every war the Zephyrians have fought has been against species that developed along the same technological lines they did. They know how to counter plasma weapons, exotic matter manipulation, and quantum consciousness warfare. They have no idea how to fight steel and mathematics. Director Kim stood beside Marcus, her cybernetic eye gleaming with something that might have been anticipation. The Princess Empress laughed at our proposal because she couldn't imagine that we might have anything to offer. She never considered that we might have something to take. The atmosphere in the assembly hall was changing. Where moments before there had been despair and desperation, now there was something else, hope mixed with a dangerous edge of anger that spoke to humanity's deepest instincts. Representative Singh from the Pacific Alliance stood up. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus looked around the assembly, seeing his own anger reflected in dozens of faces. I'm proposing that we show the galaxy exactly why it was a mistake to dismiss humanity. The Zephyrian Empire rules through fear and superior technology. But what happens when they encounter a species that their technology cannot predict or counter? We're talking about war with the most powerful empire in the galaxy, President Vasquez pointed out, though her tone suggested she was not entirely opposed to the idea. No, Dr. Liu corrected. We're talking about war with the most powerful empire in the galaxy that has never faced an enemy like us. There's a difference. Director Kim activated another holographic display, this one showing the current deployment of Zephyrian forces throughout the galaxy. Their empire is vast, but it's also overextended. They maintain control through superior technology and the belief that resistance is futile. But they've grown complacent. She pointed to specific areas on the galactic map. Their patrol fleets are designed to counter known threats. Their defensive positions assume attacks will come from ships using exotic matter drives and plasma weapons. Their communication networks rely on quantum entanglement systems that can be disrupted if you know how to introduce classical physics paradoxes into quantum systems. The implications were staggering. Marcus felt his diplomat's mind working through the possibilities, seeing opportunities that hadn't existed when he thought humanity had to compete on alien terms. We wouldn't be fighting to conquer their empire, he said slowly, working through the strategy as he spoke. We'd be fighting to prove that they're not invincible. Once their subjects see that the Zephyrians can be beaten, that their technology isn't magic, the entire foundation of their empire becomes questionable. Dr. Liu nodded eagerly. Exactly. We don't need to destroy the Zephyrian Empire. We just need to shatter the illusion of their invincibility. President Vasquez stood silent for a long moment, looking out through the transparent aluminum viewports at Earth hanging in the void beyond. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would echo through history. Dr. Liu, how many Prometheus-class vessels can we have ready for deployment in 6 months? 12 ships, Madam President. Each one equipped with weapons and defensive systems that alien technology cannot predict or counter. Director Kim, what's your assessment of our chances in a limited engagement against Zephyrian forces? Kim's cybernetic eye whirred as she processed countless variables. If we choose our targets carefully and strike where they least expect it, I believe we can achieve tactical victory in our first engagement. After that, the strategic situation becomes more complex, but the psychological impact on the empire could be devastating. President Vasquez turned to Marcus. Ambassador, you've seen their empire firsthand. You've experienced their arrogance personally. Do you believe this course of action is justified? Marcus thought of the laughter in the Zephyrian throne room, the casual contempt with which his species had been dismissed, the certainty with which the Princess Empress had declared humanity irrelevant. Madam President, he said, his voice steady and cold, I believe it's not just justified. I believe it's necessary. The galaxy needs to learn that humanity cannot be dismissed, cannot be ignored, and definitely cannot be humiliated without consequences. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. But it was decisive. Humanity would not go gently into the night of galactic irrelevance. They would remind the cosmos that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never bothered to truly understand. As the assembly disbanded and plans began to form for humanity's first interstellar war, none of them could have predicted just how profoundly their actions would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Princess Empress had laughed at a marriage proposal. She was about to discover that some rejections carry a price that empires cannot afford to pay. 6 months after the emergency assembly on Luna Station, the Kepler 442 system hosted what appeared to be a routine patrol operation. 3 Zephyrian destroyers moved in standard formation through the outer asteroid belt, their exotic matter drives creating ripples in spacetime that could be detected from light years away. The system served as a critical supply waypoint for Zephyrian forces moving between the core worlds and the frontier territories, making it a regular stop for military vessels requiring fuel and provisions. Captain Vexmore of the destroyer Inevitable Glory examined his sensor displays with the casual attention of someone who had performed this same patrol route hundreds of times before. His ship, along with its escorts Crushing Victory and Stellar Dominion, represented enough firepower to level a planet's surface. The 3 vessels carried a combined total of over 2,000 crew members, all of them veterans of the Empire's various campaigns against rebellious worlds. "Captain," reported his sensor operator, a young Zephyrian officer named Keeltar, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from the asteroid belt." Vexmore barely looked up from his tactical display. "Define unusual, ensign." "Metallic debris scattered throughout the belt, sir. The composition appears to be primitive materials. Steel, titanium, ceramic composites. Nothing that should pose any threat to our vessels." "Probably wreckage from some failed colony ship," Vexmore replied dismissively. "The outer systems are littered with the remains of species that overestimated their technological capabilities." What Captain Vexmore didn't know was that the debris his sensors had detected were actually 12 human vessels in full stealth configuration. The UES Defiance, along with 11 sister ships of the Prometheus class, had been positioned throughout the asteroid belt for the past 3 weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. Admiral Sarah Kim floated in the zero-gravity command center of the UES Defiance, her cybernetic eye interfacing directly with the ship's tactical systems. Around her, the bridge crew worked in complete silence, their every movement precise and economical. These were not the grand, sweeping bridge designs favored by alien civilizations. The human vessels were built for efficiency, function, and, above all, survival. "Zephyrian vessels are maintaining standard patrol formation," reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, the ship's tactical officer. "They're following exactly the pattern our intelligence predicted." Admiral Kim nodded, her cybernetic eye processing data streams that would have overwhelmed a purely biological mind. "Signal the fleet. Execute pattern Omega in 30 seconds. The order was transmitted through quantum-encrypted channels that the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before. Unlike the quantum entanglement communication systems favored by alien civilizations, human communications relied on mathematical encryption algorithms that were virtually unbreakable without understanding the underlying mathematical principles. Aboard the Inevitable Glory, Captain Vexmore was reviewing supply manifests when his sensor operator suddenly went rigid with alarm. "Captain, the debris field is moving." Vexmore's head snapped up just in time to see 12 contacts suddenly appear on his sensors, their energy signatures unlike anything in the Zephyrian databases. "Battle stations. All vessels, prepare for," his words were cut off as the first kinetic projectile struck his ship's shields at 30% of light speed. The tungsten rod, no larger than a telephone pole, carried more kinetic energy than most plasma cannons could generate. But, more importantly, it carried that energy in a form that Zephyrian shields were not designed to absorb. The shield generators, calibrated to deflect energy weapons and exotic matter attacks, simply could not process the raw kinetic force of classical physics taken to its absolute extreme. The tungsten rod punched through the energy barrier like it wasn't there and struck the destroyer's hull with devastating force. "Shields are fluctuating," shouted the tactical officer aboard the Inevitable Glory. "I don't understand, the energy readings don't match any known weapon signature." Captain Vexmore stared at his displays in confusion as more kinetic projectiles began striking his formation. The attacks were coming from multiple directions simultaneously, suggesting coordination that should have been impossible for primitive vessels to achieve. "Return fire," he commanded. "All batteries, target those unknown vessels." The Zephyrian destroyers unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma fire that would have vaporized any conventional fleet. Beams of superheated matter lanced through space, each one carrying enough energy to power a small city. But the human vessels moved in patterns that defied every tactical doctrine the Zephyrians had ever studied. "They're not where our targeting computers say they should be," reported the weapons officer, his voice rising with panic. "Their movement patterns don't follow any known physics model." What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that human ships moved according to mathematical principles that had never been needed by species with access to exotic matter. The human vessels used gravitational slingshots, momentum conservation, and classical orbital mechanics to achieve acceleration and maneuvering that appeared impossible to minds accustomed to simply warping spacetime. Admiral Kim watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as her fleet danced around the Zephyrian formation. "Target their communication arrays," she ordered. "I want them isolated before we move to the next phase." The human ships closed in using attack patterns derived from ancient Earth military traditions. They moved like wolf packs, like submarine squadrons, like fighter wings engaged in atmospheric combat. These were tactics born from centuries of human warfare, refined by species that had learned to fight each other using nothing but classical physics and pure determination. Another wave of kinetic projectiles struck the Zephyrian formation, and, this time Captain Vexmore saw his escort vessel Crushing Victory lose structural integrity along its entire port side. The destroyer began venting atmosphere and exotic matter fuel into the void. "How are they penetrating our defenses?" Vexmore demanded. "These readings show primitive materials. Steel and ceramic should not be capable of." His question was answered by the UES Retribution, which emerged from behind an asteroid moving at velocities that should have torn any ship apart. Its hull glowed red-hot from atmospheric friction that didn't exist in space, but the ship used that heat as a weapon, venting superheated plasma through specialized ports that turned the vessel into a kinetic missile capable of independent maneuvering. The Retribution struck the stellar Dominion amidships, its classical physics momentum transfer tearing through exotic matter containment fields and quantum armor like they were tissue paper. The Zephyrian destroyer broke apart along stress lines that had been calculated by human engineers who understood material science in ways that species accustomed to reality manipulation had never needed to learn. "Sir," shouted the communication officer aboard the Inevitable Glory. "I'm receiving a transmission from the unknown vessels." Captain Vexmore's tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but his Zephyrian pride demanded that he face his enemies with dignity. "Put them through." The main display showed Admiral Kim's face, her cybernetic eye glowing with a cold light that seemed to pierce through the screen. Behind her, the bridge of the UES Defiance looked nothing like any ship design the Zephyrians had ever encountered. It was functional, efficient, and utterly alien in its lack of artistic flourishes. "Captain Vexmore of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy," Kim said, her voice carrying clearly despite the fact that she was speaking in accented galactic standard rather than perfect Zephyrian. "My name is Admiral Sarah Kim of the United Earth Forces. You are hereby ordered to surrender your vessels and submit to human authority." Vexmore's shocked laughter was cut short by another kinetic impact that sent his ship spinning. "Human authority? Your species was dismissed by Princess Empress Lyralii herself. You have no standing in galactic affairs." Kim's expression didn't change. The Princess Empress made an error in judgment. She assumed that because humanity was technologically primitive by galactic standards, we were also strategically irrelevant. Today, you're going to help us correct that misunderstanding. You cannot defeat the Zephyrian Empire. Vexmore snarled, even as his ship's systems continued to fail around him. We command fleets that number in the thousands. We have weapons that can crack planets. We have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. And, in all that time, Kim replied calmly, you've never faced an enemy like us. Captain, your weapons are designed to fight ships that use exotic matter drives and plasma weapons. Your tactics are based on countering enemies who think like Zephyrians. Your entire military doctrine assumes that your opponents will follow the same technological evolution that every other galactic species has followed. She paused as another human vessel, the UES Vindication, performed what appeared to be an impossible 90-degree turn at high velocity, using nothing but classical thruster mechanics and gravitational momentum. But humans developed in isolation, Captain. We learned to fight using nothing but steel and mathematics. We learned to win using tactics that your people have never encountered because they've never been necessary until now. Captain Vexmore watched in horror as his remaining escort vessel lost main power and began drifting helplessly. The human fleet had accomplished in 20 minutes what should have required a major battle fleet operating for days. They had neutralized 3 Zephyrian destroyers using primitive materials and impossible tactics. This is impossible, he whispered, more to himself than to the human admiral. No, Captain, Kim corrected him. This is inevitable. The Princess Empress made the mistake of dismissing humanity without bothering to understand us. She assumed that technological inferiority meant strategic weakness. Today, you're going to carry a message back to the Empire. Vexmore's ship shuddered as human boarding pods attached to his hull using magnetic clamps that bypassed his exotic matter detection systems entirely. What message? Kim's cybernetic eye flared brighter, and, for the first time, Captain Vexmore saw something in her expression that made him understand just how profoundly the galaxy was about to change. It was not anger, not hatred, but something far more dangerous, the cold, calculating determination of a species that had been underestimated and was now prepared to prove just how wrong their enemies had been. Tell her that humanity remembers every slight, every insult, every moment of contempt. Tell her that we do not forgive, and we do not forget. And tell her that what happened here today is just the beginning. The transmission ended, leaving Captain Vexmore alone with the wreckage of his formation and the devastating realization that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted in ways that no one had anticipated. As human boarding parties secured the Zephyrian survivors and began analyzing their technology for future operations, Admiral Kim stood before the tactical display showing the next phase of humanity's campaign. The first strike had been successful beyond their most optimistic projections. "Signal Earth Command," she ordered. "Phase 1 is complete. The galaxy is about to learn that humanity cannot be dismissed." Behind her, the stars themselves seemed to watch as 12 human vessels prepared to vanish back into the darkness, carrying with them the proof that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never bothered to understand. The news of the Kepler 442 incident reached Zephyros Prime exactly 14 hours after Captain Vexmore's damaged vessel limped into the nearest Imperial outpost. The captain's report was so unprecedented, so impossible according to established galactic warfare doctrine, that it passed through 7 levels of military hierarchy before anyone believed it deserved the attention of the Imperial Court. Princess Empress Lyralii stood in her private strategy chamber, a crystalline dome that offered a panoramic view of her capital city stretching to the horizon below. The room was smaller than her public throne room but far more functional, filled with holographic displays showing real-time information from across her empire. She had been reviewing tribute reports from the outer colonies when Minister Vex Thaler burst through the privacy barriers without announcement. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, his scarred face bearing an expression she had never seen before, uncertainty. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Lyralii turned from her contemplation of the city below, her gem-like eyes focusing on her chief military strategist with the kind of attention that had made her the most feared ruler in galactic history. "Minister, you look as though you've seen something that should not exist." "Your Majesty," Vex Thaler activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. 3 of our destroyers were attacked and defeated in the Kepler 442 system by unknown vessels using impossible technology. The Princess Empress studied the tactical recording with growing incredulity. The attacking ships appeared to be constructed from primitive materials, yet they moved with impossible speed and precision. Their weapons showed no energy signatures that Imperial sensors could identify, yet they penetrated Zephyrian shields and armor like they weren't there. What species could have developed such capabilities without our knowledge? Lyralii asked, though something cold was beginning to form in her stomach as she watched the battle unfold. "According to the survivors," Vex Thaler replied, his voice carefully controlled, "the attacking fleet identified themselves as representing the United Earth Forces." The silence that followed stretched for several heartbeats as the implications sank in. Lyralii had dismissed thousands of species over her reign, crushed dozens of rebellions, and faced countless challenges to her authority. But the casual laughter with which she had rejected humanity's marriage proposal had been based on absolute certainty of their irrelevance. "Humans," she said finally, the word carrying disbelief and something else, the first taste of genuine concern she had experienced in decades. "Humans did this?" The holographic display shifted to show Captain Vexmore's debriefing, his image flickering with the interference of damaged communication equipment. "Your Imperial Majesty, their technology defies everything we know about physics. They use no exotic matter, no plasma weapons, no quantum field manipulation. Yet somehow, they achieved tactical superiority against 3 of our best vessels." Lyralii watched the recording in silence, seeing her captain's humiliation and realizing with growing alarm that it mirrored her own recent dismissal of the human ambassador. The parallel was uncomfortably exact, absolute confidence and superiority, followed by devastating proof of error. "How many ships did they use?" she asked. 12, Your Majesty." 12 primitive vessels defeated 3 Imperial destroyers carrying over 2,000 crew members. The Princess Empress moved to her command throne, a smaller version of her public seat that interfaced directly with the Empire's military networks. "Show me everything we know about human capabilities." The holographic display exploded with information, trade records, diplomatic files, intelligence reports, and technological assessments. All of it painted the same picture that had informed her dismissal of their marriage proposal. Humanity was a young, technologically inferior species that posed no threat to the established galactic order. According to our intelligence, Minister Vex Thaler reported, humans achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Their fastest ships should be incapable of matching our patrol vessels. Their weapons technology is centuries behind our own. Their military should be incapable of coordinating the kind of attack we witnessed. Yet they did coordinate it, Lyralii pointed out, her voice taking on the edge that her subordinates had learned to fear. They not only matched our vessels, they outmaneuvered them completely. Minister, how is this possible? Vex Thaler activated another display, this one showing detailed analysis of the battle footage. Your Majesty, our experts believe that humanity has developed along completely different technological lines than any species we've encountered. They appear to have mastered what they call classical physics to a degree that allows them to achieve results that mimic advanced technology using primitive materials. Lyralii studied the technical analysis with growing unease. The human weapons used kinetic energy in ways that her own physicists claimed were impossible. Their ships maneuvered using mathematical principles that the Empire's tactical computers couldn't predict or counter. Your Majesty, Vex Thaler continued, there's something else. The human admiral delivered a message specifically for you. The holographic display showed Admiral Kim's face, her cybernetic eye glowing with cold determination as she spoke directly to the camera. Princess Empress Lyralii, my name is Admiral Sarah Kim of the United Earth Forces. Your recent dismissal of humanity's diplomatic overtures was noted and will not be forgotten. Today's action represents the beginning of a new phase in human-Zephyrian relations. We suggest you reconsider your assessment of our species' capabilities. The message was respectful in tone but carried an undercurrent of threat that made Lyralii's jaw clench with anger. No one had spoken to her in such terms since she had assumed the throne. The presumption that humans could dictate terms to the Zephyrian Empire was almost incomprehensible. Your Majesty, Minister Vex Thaler said carefully, our intelligence suggests that this attack was merely a demonstration. Captain Vexmore's ship was allowed to escape to carry the message. If they had wanted to destroy our entire patrol, our analysts believe they could have done so. Lyralii felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, genuine uncertainty about the Empire's invincibility. What do you recommend, Minister? I recommend that we take this threat seriously, Your Majesty. We need to understand how human technology works and develop countermeasures. Until then, we should consider reinforcing our border patrols and, no. Lyralii's voice cut through his recommendations like a blade. I will not allow the Empire to appear weak by responding defensively to a primitive species. If humanity wishes to challenge Zephyrian authority, they will learn the price of such presumption. But, even as she spoke, Lyralii knew that the situation was more complex than her imperial pride wanted to admit. The attack on the Kepler 442 patrol had been surgically precise, devastatingly effective, and completely unexpected. Worse, news of the incident was already spreading through the Empire's communication networks. Within hours of Captain Vexmore's arrival at the Imperial outpost, information about the human attack had reached 17 different worlds. The subjects of the Zephyrian Empire, hundreds of species that had lived under Imperial rule for generations, were learning that the supposedly invincible Imperial Navy had been defeated by a species most of them had never even heard of. On Thorax Prime, the insectoid Thoraxians who served as the Empire's shock troops gathered in their hive clusters, their chittering conversations filled with speculation about what this development might mean for the balance of galactic power. Their species had been conquered by the Zephyrians 800 years ago, and their warrior culture had never forgotten the dream of independence. In the crystalline cities of Valkyria, the six-armed merchants who managed much of the Empire's trade networks began calculating the economic implications of a challenge to Zephyrian supremacy. If humanity could actually threaten the Empire, then, the complex web of trade agreements and tribute systems that held the galaxy together might suddenly become far more negotiable. Most significantly, in the Outer Rim territories where Zephyrian control was maintained primarily through the threat of overwhelming force, colonial governors began receiving reports of increased unrest. The mere possibility that the Empire could be successfully challenged was enough to kindle hope in species that had been suppressed for centuries. Princess Empress Lyralii, monitoring these developments from her strategy chamber, realized that the human attack had accomplished something far more dangerous than simple military victory. It had shattered the aura of invincibility that was the true foundation of her empire's power. Your Majesty, Advisor Zilnara entered the chamber with a datapad containing the latest intelligence reports. We're receiving confirmation that news of the human attack has spread throughout the Empire. Several border worlds are reporting increased rebel activity. Lyralii accepted the datapad with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the storm of calculations running through her mind. The numbers confirmed her worst fears. The psychological impact of humanity's demonstration was already destabilizing the carefully maintained balance of fear and respect that kept hundreds of worlds in line. Minister, she said to Vex Thaler, I want a full strategic assessment of human capabilities. Use whatever resources necessary. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Yes, Your Majesty. And our response to their challenge? Lyralii stood and moved to the great window overlooking her capital city. Below, millions of Zephyrians went about their daily lives, unaware that their empire's 3,000-year dominance was suddenly in question. The irony was not lost on her that the species she had dismissed with such casual contempt had managed to accomplish what no rebellion or rival empire had achieved. They had made her doubt. Summon the War Council, she commanded. If humanity wishes to test the strength of the Zephyrian Empire, they will discover why we have ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia. But, privately, as she watched the sun set over her capital world, Princess Empress Lyralii found herself remembering the human ambassador's face as she had dismissed his proposal with laughter. She had seen humiliation in his eyes, but she had missed something else, the cold, calculating anger of a species that had never learned to accept defeat gracefully. The galaxy was awakening to a new reality, and, for the first time in her reign, the Princess Empress was not certain that the Empire would emerge from this awakening unchanged. Meanwhile, in the depths of space between star systems, 12 human vessels moved in formations that would have seemed random to alien observers but were actually based on mathematical principles derived from chaos theory and game theory applications. Admiral Kim stood in the command center of the UES Defiance, reviewing reports from across the galaxy as news of their victory spread. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, were intercepting increased communication traffic throughout the Empire. Multiple worlds are showing signs of unrest. Kim nodded, her cybernetic eye processing data streams that showed exactly what they had hoped for. The psychological impact of their demonstration was exceeding their most optimistic projections. Signal the fleet. Phase 2 begins now. The galaxy is about to learn that humanity's patience has limits, and the Princess Empress has exceeded them. 3 weeks after the Kepler 442 incident, Princess Empress Lyralii stood before the assembled War Council in the Empire's most secure strategic facility. The chamber was carved from a single massive crystal deep beneath the surface of Zephyros Prime, its walls pulsing with defensive energy fields that could withstand a direct planetary bombardment. Around the circular table, the greatest military minds in galactic history studied holographic displays showing the current state of the Empire. The news was worse than anyone had dared to imagine. Your Imperial Majesty, reported Fleet Admiral Kexvalen, his ancient features marked by centuries of successful campaigns, we are facing the most significant challenge to Imperial authority in our recorded history. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with Imperial holdings marked in purple and areas of active rebellion highlighted in warning red. The red zones were spreading like an infection across the Outer Rim territories. How many worlds are currently in open revolt? Lyralii asked, her voice maintaining its imperial composure despite the magnitude of what she was seeing. 47 worlds have declared independence in the past week alone, Admiral Kexvalen replied grimly. Another 120 are showing signs of organized resistance. The Outer Rim territories are essentially in complete upheaval. Minister Vex Thaler activated another display showing fleet dispositions across the Empire. Your Majesty, our forces are stretched beyond optimal deployment ratios. We have sufficient ships to maintain control of the core worlds and critical trade routes, but suppressing widespread rebellion across the Outer Rim would require resources we simply cannot sustain indefinitely. Lyralii studied the tactical situation with the strategic mind that had built and maintained the largest empire in galactic history. The mathematics were simple and devastating. The Zephyrian Empire ruled through the threat of overwhelming force, but that force was finite. If enough worlds rebelled simultaneously, the Empire's military could not be everywhere at once. What triggered this cascade, she demanded, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Advisor Zilnara stepped forward with a data tablet containing intelligence reports from across the Empire. Your Majesty, our analysis indicates that news of the human victory has been systematically distributed through underground communication networks. The rebels are using it as proof that the Empire can be successfully challenged. The Princess Empress felt a cold fury building in her chest as she realized the scope of what humanity had accomplished. Their attack on 3 destroyers had been tactically insignificant, the Empire could lose 1,000 ships and barely notice. But the strategic impact was catastrophic. By demonstrating that Zephyrian forces could be defeated, humanity had lit a fuse that was now burning throughout the galaxy. What do we know about current human activities? Lyralii asked. Fleet Admiral Kexvalin grimaced as he activated a new display. That's where the situation becomes truly concerning, Your Majesty. We've confirmed at least 18 separate incidents of human ships appearing in various systems across the Outer Rim. They're not engaging our forces directly, but they're providing technological assistance and strategic advice to rebel groups. The display showed a pattern of human activity that was both brilliant and infuriating. Instead of attacking the Empire's military directly, human forces were acting as force multipliers for existing resistance movements. They provided weapons that Imperial forces couldn't detect, tactical advice that confused traditional counterinsurgency operations, and, most dangerously, proof that the Empire could be successfully opposed. They're fighting a different kind of war, Minister Vexthaler observed. They're not trying to conquer territory or destroy our fleets. They're trying to destroy the idea that resistance is futile. Lyralii stood and began pacing around the strategic table, her mind working through implications that grew more troubling with each passing moment. Show me their technological capabilities. Everything we've learned from captured equipment. The holographic display shifted to show detailed analysis of human weapons and technology recovered from various battlefields. What the Imperial scientists had discovered was simultaneously encouraging and terrifying. Your Majesty, reported Chief Scientist QY Elmara, human technology is indeed primitive by our standards, but it's primitive in ways that make it almost impossible to counter effectively. Their weapons use no energy signatures that our detection systems are designed to identify. Their ships are built from materials that our sensors classify as harmless debris. She gestured to a 3-dimensional model of a captured human kinetic projectile. This tungsten rod weighs less than 50 kilograms, yet it carries enough kinetic energy to penetrate our best defensive shields. Our exotic matter barriers are designed to deflect energy weapons and quantum field manipulations, not classical physics taken to its absolute extreme. Can we develop countermeasures? Lyralii demanded. Chief Scientist QY Elmara hesitated before answering. Your Majesty, developing effective countermeasures would require us to essentially redesign our entire military technology base. We would need to rebuild our shields to handle kinetic impacts, reprogram our targeting computers to predict movement patterns based on classical physics, and train our officers to fight an enemy that thinks in completely alien mathematical frameworks. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire's technological superiority was based on 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge and advancement. But that same advancement had led them down technological paths that made them vulnerable to approaches they had never considered necessary. How long would such a redesign take? Minister Vexthaler asked. Optimistically? 5 to 10 years for basic countermeasures. Perhaps 20 years for comprehensive defensive systems, the scientist replied. Lyralii felt the weight of imperial history pressing down on her shoulders. We don't have 20 years. We may not have 20 weeks if this rebellion spreads to the core worlds. As if summoned by her words, a communication officer entered the chamber with an expression of barely controlled panic. Your Imperial Majesty, we're receiving priority transmissions from the Proxima Centauri system. Human vessels have appeared in orbit around the capital world. The War Council fell silent as the implications sank in. Proxima Centauri wasn't an Outer Rim territory or a rebellious colony world. It was one of the Empire's core systems, home to nearly 1 billion Imperial citizens and a major military shipyard. Put the transmission through, Lyralii commanded. The holographic display showed the bridge of what was unmistakably a human vessel. Admiral Kim appeared exactly as she had in her previous message, but now she was flanked by officers representing dozens of different alien species, Thoraxians, Valkyrians, and others that Lyralii recognized as former Imperial subjects. Princess Empress Lyralii, Admiral Kim said, her voice carrying clearly through the quantum communication system, I am speaking to you from the bridge of the UES Liberation, currently in orbit around Proxima Centauri 3. I am accompanied by representatives of the United Liberation Front, a coalition of species that have chosen to withdraw their support from the Zephyrian Empire. Lyralii's hands clenched into fists as she realized that humanity had not just attacked her empire, they had organized her enemies into a coordinated resistance movement. We are prepared to offer you terms for a peaceful transition of power, Kim continued. The Zephyrian Empire's 3,000-year reign has ended. The galaxy will no longer accept rule by fear and technological intimidation. Terms? Lyralii's voice carried all the imperial authority of her bloodline. You dare to offer me terms? Kim's expression didn't change. Princess Empress, your empire's strength was always psychological rather than absolute. You ruled because your subjects believed resistance was impossible. That belief no longer exists. The display shifted to show a galactic map that made the War Council gasp in collective shock. Nearly 300 worlds were now showing active resistance to imperial rule. The rebellion had spread far beyond anything they had imagined possible. The choice before you is simple, Kim continued. Accept a negotiated transition to a more democratic galactic government, or face a war that you cannot win. Your military superiority is meaningless when fighting an enemy that operates outside your technological paradigm while commanding the support of half the galaxy. Lyralii stared at the display, her strategic mind finally grasping the full scope of what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't just defeated 3 destroyers, they had orchestrated the largest rebellion in galactic history and positioned themselves as its leaders. You underestimate the strength of the Empire, she said finally. Kim's cybernetic eye flared brighter. With respect, Your Imperial Majesty, you underestimated the resourcefulness of a species fighting for its survival. You dismissed our marriage proposal with laughter. You assumed that technological inferiority meant strategic irrelevance. Those assumptions have cost you an empire. The truth of those words hit Lyralii like a physical blow. Her casual dismissal of humanity's diplomatic overtures had been based on absolute confidence in her own superiority. She had never considered that the species she was rejecting might possess qualities that weren't immediately apparent in their technology or military strength. What are your terms? She asked, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. Complete dissolution of the imperial government, Kim replied without hesitation. Establishment of a galactic council with representation for all species. Immediate independence for all worlds that choose it. And personal exile for yourself and your inner circle to prevent future attempts at imperial restoration. The War Council erupted in outrage at these demands, but Lyralii held up a hand for silence. She looked around the chamber at the greatest military minds in the Empire, seeing in their faces the same realization that was crystallizing in her own mind: they were defeated. Not militarily, the Empire still possessed the largest fleet in the galaxy. But, psychologically, strategically, and politically, the war was already over. The aura of invincibility that had held the Empire together for 3 millennia had been shattered by a species she had never bothered to understand. You have won, she said finally, the admission costing her more than any physical wound. But, understand this, Admiral Kim, you have not defeated the Zephyrian Empire through superior strength. You have defeated it through superior cunning. Kim nodded respectfully. Your Imperial Majesty, the greatest victories are won by understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. You saw only our primitive technology and concluded we were irrelevant. You never considered that our isolation might have given us perspectives that your empire couldn't anticipate. As the communication ended and the War Council began the painful process of negotiating the Empire's surrender, Lyralii found herself thinking of the human ambassador who had knelt before her throne with his marriage proposal. She had laughed at his presumption, dismissed his species as beneath her notice, and never imagined that her rejection would become the catalyst for the fall of the greatest empire in galactic history. The galaxy was indeed watching, just as the story's title had promised. But they were not watching the casual dismissal of a primitive species. They were watching the rise of a new power that had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never bother to understand. In the end, the Princess Empress learned the hardest lesson of all, that empires built on arrogance and contempt carry within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. And, sometimes, those seeds are planted by the very people you dismiss as unworthy of your attention. The human race had reminded the galaxy that survival makes you resourceful, isolation makes you innovative, and humiliation makes you dangerous. The Zephyrian Empire fell not to superior technology or overwhelming force, but to the wounded pride of a species that refused to accept their assigned place in the cosmic hierarchy. As news of the Empire's surrender spread throughout the galaxy, one truth became clear to every civilization watching: never underestimate a human with nothing left to lose, because they just might find a way to win anyway.